Welcome. My name is Marjorie Thomas. I want to first of all thank you for being here. Thank you for being interested in what's going on with the Smoky Mountain Smelter site. Thank you for wanting to learn more. As I said, my name is Marjorie Thomas. I'm the Community Involvement Coordinator for the EPA in Region 4. It's my job to keep you informed, and hopefully this will be a lovely relationship from this point on. I wanted to take a minute to kind of welcome those that are virtual, and I have some directions. If you are joining by phone, please press *6 to mute and unmute your phone when the question and answer session begins. If you're joining this meeting by Zoom, please use the toolbar controls to mute and unmute, to change the display, turn on the captions, raise your hand, that kind of stuff. Please note that closed captioning and live transcription is available. All right, without further ado, I do want to ask that you hold all questions until the presentation is over. And what we'll do is we'll take questions from the audience and then take some questions from online. And then we'll come back, take some questions from the audience, take questions online. We'll be fair. How does that sound? All right, are you ready? All right, first thing, I'd like to make some introductions. With the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation, we have Steve Sanders, Lee Barron, John LaCroix, and Billy Freeman. Gentlemen, will y'all raise your hands? Thank you so much. With the City of Knoxville, we have Patrick Kontovich. Did I get it? Thank you for being here. With the EPA, we have Scott Miller, Rusty Kessel, Peter Johnson, Laura Niles, and Janae Wilburn, and me. Are there any others from the city or county or any other elected officials that we need to acknowledge? I do want to, yes. Oh, Quinn, thank you for being here. We've emailed a couple of times. Thank you so much. I do want to give a special shout out to Lisa Wilson and to Aaron Browning. They have been so gracious and hospitable, and many thanks to them. In just a minute, actually now would be a great time, I'm going to go ahead and also introduce Mr. Eric Johnson and Miss Kathy Scott. For those of you that live here and are aware, there are some other sites of interest, and they are going to help distinguish between those sites and the Smoky Mountain Smelter site. So I'm going to turn it over to them.
Thank you, Marjorie. Marjorie Thomas reached out to the Vestal Community Organization for purposes of creating community engagement regarding the reopening of the Smoky Mountain Smelter site. The Vestal Community Organization is looking at the entire area and some concerns about some properties that are in addition to what the EPA is doing right now here at the Smoky Mountain Smelter site. Kathy Scott is going to touch on them real briefly because we want to kind of pivot here. We want you to know a little bit about the big picture, but we want to spend the vast majority of the time speaking about the EPA's work in the Smoky Mountain Smelter. Now, they did some work earlier that I looked at today, and I was super thrilled at what I saw that was already accomplished. But even more is going to be accomplished in the next coming months from now we're going to speak about. And I want you to be on the edge of your seat to hear this, because this is really good for our community. And from a Vestal position, we're interested in trying to replicate some of these remedial actions to some additional properties in the Vestal community. There's two things that really have my attention here. One of them is the enhanced cleanup work that's going to be done at the Smoky Mountain Smelter site. And the second part is the enhanced engagement that's been created from the EPA regarding our community. okay? These people are extremely approachable. They're loaded with information. They're going to answer our questions, and I just hope we can sit on the edge of our seats and do as much listening as possible here to hear what they're doing. So this is really great. I want to make reference to a meeting we're having a week from Wednesday on the 22nd, where we're going to be discussing some of these other properties that we're concerned about. I have a flyer on that you can pick up as a reminder, and I'm available after the meeting and to answer some questions. Questions directed to the Vestal Community Organization can be directed to me individually, and we can make the best use of our time. Thank you so much. I would like to introduce Kathy Scott right now, who's done a lot of work on looking at like we were saying, the whole picture. And she's got kind of a brief little summary, and then she's going to pivot and pass the ball to EPA, and then they're going to make a basket.
I know they said this before, but I live right down the street, so we're not going to really ask questions of me today. We're having the meeting, so I can talk almost any time.
Talking to the mic.
All right, this is going to be hard to talk in the mic because I want to point at the board.
You're still not talking into the mic.
I'm still not talking.
Pick it up and talk directly into the microphone. Not to the side of it.
There you go.
Put it up to your mouth.
And then watch your step above. Sorry.
This isn't making me nervous at all. So I want to talk about the other Superfund sites, that are in South Knoxville. So all of these sites are on Maryville Pike. They were all owned or were owned by the Witherspoons. This is the Smoky Mountain Smelter site that Peter is going to talk about, the EPA guy. These are Witherspoon sites where they processed radioactive materials, along with the site at 901. And above it is not a Superfund site, Dan, is not a Superfund site. But I'll tell you more about it later. It's a site of concern. So you are here to orient you a little bit. This is where Gigi's Green Grocer is. If you go down further, this all is Montgomery Village here. And down at the bottom, you can see Love That Barbecue. And then for the bar people in the audience, Tipsy's is right here about a stone's throw away from this radioactive site. And it's about time, it's very close to the landfill site. I don't know if you people can see this or not, but
Not too well.
the lights are all on or all off. Oh, I know. You can turn them all on, or you can turn them all off. I'm not in charge of the lights. I think that they're actually on a motion detector too. So like if anyone moves, then they'll turn back on again. So this is a close-up of the sites the southernmost sites. They are all on the Flanagan Branch watershed. You can tell why it's called a branch because it has many tributaries that look like a branch. It goes through the Smoky Mountain Smelter site. It also goes through the hot field and the landfill of the Witherspoon's radioactive processing site. Oh, look at that. That wasn't that hard.
Nobody move.
It then flows downhill past Mount Olive School and empties into the Tennessee at I.C. King Park. This is a close-up of where it empties out at I.C. King Park. You can barely see it. There is a boat ramp there where a lot of boats, like small boats like canoes and kayaks, put in, and there is also a fishing dock. And Icy King is a big draw to South Knoxville now. This is the AMBC site where they have all their trails that they maintain. And both the city and the county say it's a good place to fish and to boat.
Don't eat the fish.
There's no signs that say that. So I just want to talk about the Smoky Mountain Smelter really briefly. Peter Johnson's going to talk about that. I mainly want to highlight that it was bought by the Witherspoon and Johnson in '79, and then they sold, it was, Johnson took over as the sole owner in '84, and still today there is leachate from the site spilling into the Flanagan Branch. Say it again, don't eat the fish. So this is the Smoky Mountain Smelter site, and I'm going to mention this because this happens a lot with these different sites. This part here was bought and sold on the same timeline as I just discussed. The Witherspoon bought it with Johnson, and then Johnson took over as sole owner. But in 1999, Witherspoon bought it back under another LLC called Maryville Pike Inc. And we don't know if those sites are contaminated at all, but they own them, pay taxes on them, that kind of thing. So I'm actually going to just go ahead and flip through these. 1, 2, 3. I don't need to talk about these. We're kind of pressed for time. One more. So the other property, these are the Witherspoon properties that were lower. There's a hot field and there's a landfill. They were paid by the DOE in Oak Ridge to take on their uranium contaminated waste. They brought it down to the hot field site and they sorted the metal with magnets, and then local citizens would buff the surface of the metal, and they would put acid on it to determine what the metal was. And they wore no masks. They were never given any protective equipment at all. So again, I'm going to kind of just go through this. If you come to the meeting, I'll go through in more details, but they get into some trouble with some infractions, and then the landfill was legally closed, but they were still dumping there as late as 1983. Back one. Okay. So it was put on the Tennessee Superfund list, and then finally in 1991, they asked not just the Witherspoons as they had in the past, but they asked the Witherspoons and the DOE to do something about cleaning it up. And if you could go to the next slide. I'm going to switch over to the more northern sites. This is 901 Maryville Pike, and this ended up being the most contaminated of all these sites, and that's here. And this is Candora Properties, Inc., and I'm going to talk about this last. But just to orient you a little bit, this is the Goose Creek. It goes through the 901 site. It continues on through the Rogers Asphalt site, then goes through the Candora site, then goes through another Roger Group site, and then goes to Maryville Park. It's right beside the Greenway there, and it will hopefully that Greenway will connect both of our beautiful Civil War sites, and then empties out into the Tennessee right across from the university. Next slide. So, so they get in more trouble. They operate the 901 site with gross indifference. So at this site, when they first surveyed it, they found yellow cake uranium and yellow uranium hexafluoride there. If you're kind of like yellow cake uranium rings a bell to anyone, in the run up to the Iraqi war, there and weapons of mass destruction and all that, there was a report that the Iraqis had obtained enough yellow cake uranium from the Africans to build an atomic bomb. Meanwhile, there was some just down the street in an unguarded building. So the 901 site was found to be extremely polluted with PCBs, mercury, uranium, and plutonium. Yes, which is a man-made, isotope. So in 2003, they finally started cleaning up the 901 site. And in 2006, they finally started cleaning up the landfill where all the waste from when they're storing, that's where it went, among other things.
WBR
There were
newsroom.
blood bags found there and asbestos and other waste. So there was a total of 15,700 trucks took the waste back to Oak Ridge where it was incinerated and then buried for a total cost of $35 million. As far as we know, the Witherspoons have never paid any of their fines. They still own the 901 site and they're paying taxes on it. And it's supposed to be released soon by the Department of Remediation, which is a state site. So they'll be allowed to do whatever they want with it. And this is also true of the landfill and Hotfield sites. It's owned by various different Witherspoon family members. Go ahead. So to get back to the Candoro site, that is not a Superfund site. As far as we know, even though it is 1,000 feet away from the 901 site, and it was owned when all of the stuff was going on, when they were getting in trouble and moving stuff around, it has never been tested for any contamination. It was in 1991, after they had closed the landfill site, it was bought by Candoro Properties, Inc., which is another Witherspoon entity. And then this past year, Dax Witherspoon requested a rezoning, and he was turned down unanimously by City Council, and now he's suing the city. So that's it. Thank you.
So this, uh-oh.
Testing. Oh my goodness.
Can you all hear me? Yes? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. So tonight we're going to focus on the 1508 site, the Smoky Mountain Smelter site. It's my understanding that there is another meeting in a week or two.
Yeah, we got it.
It's my understanding that another meeting will be held by the Vestal Community Organization to discuss those other sites. Tonight, we're focusing on the Smoky Mountain Smelter site. And today is this meeting is a twofold purpose meeting. The first is really to celebrate the fact that the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law is providing funding for the final cleanup of this site. So that is a great thing, a thing to celebrate. The other thing to celebrate is that today starts the remedial action cleanup for this site to really finish the cleanup of this site. I would like, as part of my presentation, I'd like to walk you through the process of Superfund. Superfund, Smoky Mountain Smelters is a Superfund site. And so there are steps along the way. Those steps take time to get through the cleanup process, but that's what I'd like to do right now. Janae, can you, thank you. Bear with us. Technology is a great thing, but it can sure pose some challenges. think we're getting there.
All right.
Yay. How many times can you see that one slide? Okay, well. Can you all see that? No, okay. It was worth a try, it was worth a try.
Thanks for your patience, y'all.
So I'll go ahead and put in another plug. If you have not signed in, please do so. That helps me build my mailing list so that you are aware of any communication that goes on from the EPA.
Where do the Witherspoons live? In Knoxville, I think.
I don't know. I don't know. Okay.
You got a little. In West Knoxville, I've been. You think?
All right, Janae, can you forward it to the Superfund process?
I believe Knoxville Drive was where the city was attempting to help Max Witherspoon about his change of zoning.
All right, so I'm going to start with the Superfund process. And I'm actually, since this is such a bigger map than that, I want to walk you to how we got to the spot where we are right here, okay? So, years ago, contamination was, I'm sorry, yeah. Years,
As far as I
is
can
that as far
stretch
as
it,
it'll go?
Yeah.
Then I'll
Yeah.
just use it.
Yeah.
Okay, so I won't point. Peter, do you mind pointing?
Yeah, I can.
Awesome. We'll be the Vanna and Pat Sajak of tonight. So years ago, contamination was suspected and reported at the site. EPA did a preliminary site investigation or site assessment, which is at PASI, and determined that there was contamination needing to be cleaned up. Once an assessment of the contamination was done and it was determined that there was risk to human health and the environment, EPA proposed with public input and then made the decision to place the site on the NPL, which is the National Priorities List.
What year again?
It was placed on the NPL in 2010. All right, so Peter, can you point to where? So that's the second step of the Superfund process. And just so you know, not all sites that have contamination qualify to go on the NPL. A site has to score a numeric ranking or a numeric scoring of 28.5, and Smoky Mountain Smelters did qualify. So after the NPL listing, EPA conducted further site investigation, which is the next step, the RIFS, to include investigations on all pathways, not just the one that was evaluated for the hazard ranking score for the NPL listing. All pathways include groundwater, surface water, soil exposure, and subsurface intrusion and air. Then the next step is the ROD, or the Record of Decision, and the public had input during this step. This is where cleanup actions or alternatives were presented, and then a preferred cleanup method was chosen. Now you see the arrow. This is where we are now, the remedial design, remedial action phase. And the remedial design has already been done. Now we're at remedial action. This is where the preferred cleanup that was chosen from the previous stage begins. It is during this time that the bulk of the cleanup work will happen. Janae, if you'll. So at this stage where we are right now, I want to talk about community involvement. It's my job as a community involvement coordinator to keep you informed about the progress of the cleanup. This might be through a fact sheet or an update, a community meeting, an informal presentation. It's to keep you aware of the activities that are going on at the site. Also, for you to know, we have a site webpage that houses all site-related documents and community updates, and that website address will be shared at the end of the presentation. If you don't have access to a computer, you can go to the library and they can assist you with getting the information online about the site. I want you to know that you can always reach out to me, either by email or phone if you have questions, and I'll share my contact with you at the end. Now, I'm going to walk you through the next steps of the Superfund process so that you can know what's ahead after the remedial action is complete. Will you do Mariana again?
Oh, sure.
So once they're, oh, can you go back one? One more. Yes, thank you. Once the remedial action is finished, the next step is the construction complete step. This is when all physical construction for the cleanup of the entire site has been done. Then the next step is the post-construction phase, and this ensures that Superfund cleanups provide for the long-term protection of human health and the environment. During this step, EPA will regularly monitor and review the site to be sure that the cleanup continues to be effective and enforce any necessary restrictions to minimize the potential for human exposure to contamination. When all site cleanup has been cleaned and all cleanup goals have been achieved, the site can be considered from deletion off the national priorities list, again with public input. The last step is for reuse and redevelopment of the site. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a minute, but I do want to interject something here. A site doesn't have to be taken off the NPL, the National Priorities List, before we enter into that phase of reuse and redevelopment. As long as there are institutional controls and restrictions in place, then reuse and redevelopment can happen at a site. Now, the big ta-da is the reuse and redevelopment of the site. And this is EPA's goal, really, to return the land back to productivity, whether it be for industrial or commercial use, for housing, transportation, community infrastructure, recreational purposes. No matter what use is appropriate for the site, the community benefits from restoring the site to productivity because the property can once again add to the economic, social, and ecological value of the community. So the steps of the Superfund process take time, but we want you to know that we're all in this together. Now, Janae, if you'll go. We're going to go back to now where we are. Peter, if you'll. So here's where we are. And now I'm going to turn it over to Peter Johnson, who is the remedial project manager for the site. Peter is, again, EPA Region 4, and he's going to talk about the cleanup activities.
Okay, can everybody hear me okay? Yeah. Great. Thank you, Marjorie, and thank you, Eric and Kathy, for giving us kind of the bigger picture of the area. And I'm going to zoom in on the Smoky Mountain Smelter site. So firstly, I just want to say thank you all for being here and for having us here in your community to host this event. Not only am I the remedial project manager for Smoky Mountain Smelters and am committed to shepherding this cleanup process, I have a personal connection to the area. I grew up in Maryville, Tennessee, but I also have ties here directly in Vestal. My parents lived just down the road from here off of Martin Mill Pike years ago. So it's good to see some familiar faces in the crowd and some of the names virtually as well. So I'm glad to be a part of this next phase of the work needed here at Smoky Mountain Smelters. And I'm grateful for the community's engagement tonight. This is a wonderful turnout. And again, thank you for being here. I'm going to now share with you some of the Smoky Mountain Smelters history, what has already been done at the site, and what is proposed for the site and what started today, the remedial action. The remedial action, which will be discussed here in just a few minutes. So you can go to the next slide. Yeah. So Smoky Mountain Smelters is located at 1508 Maryville Pike in Knoxville, Knox County, Tennessee, within this neighborhood in South Knoxville, Vestal. It's approximately 13-acre site comprised of 3 Knox County parcels. It's encompassed by residential and commercial properties to the north, undeveloped wooded areas to the south, Montgomery Village apartments, which are approximately just 200 feet east-northeast of the site, and residential and commercial properties to the west. There are currently active Norfolk, Southern, and CSX transportation rail lines that border the site to the east and to the west, respectively. Many of the nearby residential areas are considered low density, and there are also larger areas that are undeveloped. Kathy touched on this just a little bit. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about the site's history. So between 1922 and 1979, fertilizer and agricultural chemical companies operated on site. And at that time, in 1979, Smoky Mountain Smelters started operation of a secondary aluminum smelter at the site. The process involved the smelting of scrap aluminum and aluminum dross, which is a waste byproduct of aluminum smelting. It can be a mixture of aluminum oxides, and also the casting of molten aluminum ingots, which is a mass of metal that has been cast into a specific shape, like a bar or a sheet. Waste material that was generated from the operation was primarily what's called salt cake, a residual byproduct of aluminum smelting with a high salt and a low metal content. Other waste materials included baghouse dust and discarded aluminum dross. The southern portion of the site used to be a small stream valley with wastewater ponds. So if you go to the next. Yeah, so if you see there in the screen, the blue area there, those were the wastewater ponds that were utilized by the previous fertilizer operation. And that area was used as an unlicensed landfill and was entirely filled in with waste. A variety of demolition and industrial waste and waste generated at the site included slag and cinders from furnace operations, and those are all byproducts of aluminum smelting. And those were all discarded in that, what I was calling the stream valley, which is now filled in. In 1983, the state of Tennessee's Division of Solid Waste Management issued a notice to Smoky Mountain Smelters stating that the site was unsuitable for use as an industrial landfill. However, landfilling continued to occur at the site for several years. The Knox County Department for Air Pollution Control documented numerous citizen complaints regarding excessive air emissions from the site and cited Smoky Mountain Smelters for several air quality violations in the 1980s. Some reported an odor, an ammonia-like odor. Smoky Mountain Smelters ceased operations in 1994, but left behind the buildings, the equipment, and the waste. Okay, next slide. So there's been several site investigations at the site starting in 1997. So from 1997 to 2009, EPA and TDEC, the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation, characterized the composition and contaminants within the waste piles, raw materials on the on-site lagoon, the ponds I was previously talking about, to the unnamed tributary, and the downstream impacts to the unnamed tributary, as well as Flanagan Branch. During the TDEC and EPA investigations, multiple contaminants were observed at the site, some from fertilizer and agricultural operations, but some also, of course, from Smoky Mountain Smelters. Some of the contaminants detected at the site in surface water and the sediment include ammonia, arsenic, lead, aluminum, copper. In the leachate seep, which is the fluid and the liquid that flows out from that unlicensed landfill, there were PCBs, or polychlorinated biphenyls, were detected. Antimony, arsenic, chromium, copper, amongst others, were also detected in that leachate. Aluminum, epoxide, cadmium, mercury, chromium were detected in the waste piles along with other contaminants. And in the groundwater, PCBs were also detected along with beryllium, cadmium, chromium, PAHs, which is polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, amongst other contaminants. So the salt, the dross and the salt cake, which were disposed at the site, are water reactive materials that release heat and ammonia gas and leach aluminum, ammonia, chlorides, and many other contaminants. So it's not surprising that some of these contaminants were detected during the investigations. Next slide. So the removal actions and the listing on the national priorities list. So in 2009, EPA conducted what's called a limited removal action, and that was essentially fixing the fence. There were trespassers coming onto the site, and the trespassers could have been exposed to the contamination. The next year, in 2010, the EPA initiated a removal action to reduce direct exposure and to stop off-site migration of contaminants. During the removal, EPA demolished the remaining steel building, disposed of demolition debris off-site, consolidated and capped 2,700 cubic yards of aluminum dross and 75,000 cubic yards of salt cake on site. They constructed a cap atop the waste piles and constructed 2 drainage channels along the east and west perimeter of the site. And that temporary cap was comprised of 12 inches of clay and 6 inches of topsoil on top of that, and was then seeded. In September of 2010, the site was listed on the national priorities list due to the contamination that I just discussed. And by 2011, the EPA had completed all of its removal activities. All right, next slide. So what has been done since 2011, since the removal actions? A remedial investigation feasibility study, otherwise known as an RIFS, was conducted between 2011 and 2014 by the EPA. The EPA issued a cleanup plan known as a record of decision that Marjorie spoke about earlier to address all remaining on-site contamination. And the ROD requires certain cleanup and certain requirements on-site, which included the construction of a RCRA Subtitle C, which is an engineered cap over the previously capped areas to prevent additional leaching of contaminants to groundwater and surface water. The ROD also requires pH adjustment of groundwater to promote precipitation of metals contamination that had been detected in the shallow superficial aquifer. Monitoring of groundwater contamination, continued monitoring of groundwater contamination in that superficial aquifer amongst institutional controls. And these controls preserve the integrity of the cap, prevent disturbance of waste beneath the cap, prevent use of contaminated groundwater, and limit site property use to commercial and industrial. In addition, the ROD specifically states that installation of new water supply wells within the plume area would be prohibited. It also requires that site inspections be conducted to confirm compliance with institutional control objectives. But not only that, an annual compliance certificate needs to be prepared and provided to the EPA. In 2018, the EPA completed a remedial design to conduct cleanup activities and began negotiations with potential responsible parties to conduct the cleanup. And in 2019 and 2020, the EPA's Superfund redevelopment program prepared an initial reuse assessment for Smoky Mountain Smelters and adjacent vacant properties in July of 2020. In December of 2020, EPA conducted further analysis into local infrastructure, property ownership, and redevelopment potential. And this study area encompassed approximately 120 acres and 10 parcels that were east of the CSX rail line and west of the Norfolk Southern line, just south of the Smoky Mountain smelter site. And this study was to evaluate the broader development and land use for the site and those surrounding areas. The area is part of what's called an opportunity zone, which is a geographic area identified at the state and federal level that offers economic and community development incentives for tax equity investors. Several challenges were noted in the reuse assessment, and one of those is that the property along the corridor are landlocked, and access to the majority of the study area is limited by those rail lines that I just spoke about. In 2020, investigation of the potential responsible parties had been completed, and Smoky Mountain Smelters was determined to be a fund-led site, which essentially means that this is funded entirely by the federal government. The EPA obtained the funds to begin cleanup activities, the remedial action that started today, using the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, otherwise known as BILL. Until this historic bill investment, many Superfund sites had remained backlogged, including Smoky Mountain Smelters. As mentioned, the remedial action started today, and we are expecting it to be fully completed by November of this year, so approximately 9 months. And the RA is going to focus essentially on 3 things: consolidation, capping, and groundwater treatment. The consolidating will include consolidating what's called Source Area 1, which is the larger former waste pile area that filled in the southern stream valley, and Source Area 2, which is a source on the former processing building footprint. Source Area 2 soil area will be excavated down to that existing concrete building slab and will be placed at Source Area 1. So on this slide, I have 3 figures. The next 3 slides are those figures kind of blown up. I really wanted you to see some of the detail here, because this is the meat of the remedial action. So the capping, we'll install an engineered cap atop consolidated source areas at Source Area 1 to prevent stormwater from contacting that waste placed under the cap and prevent leaching of the contaminants to groundwater and surface water. The cap will consist of a gas collection system, a geosynthetic clay liner, a linear low-density polyethylene liner, a geosynthetic drainage layer, 18 inches of clean cover soil, 6 inches of topsoil, and will then be seeded and mulched. The other phase of the project is the groundwater treatment. As mentioned earlier, there were several contaminants found in the groundwater that needs to be addressed. However, the temporary cap that was installed, we've already seen improvements to some of the contaminants that had been detected in the past at lower levels. The in situ groundwater injections, that's going to be the remedy. And in 2018, there was a pilot study conducted using calcium polysulfide injecting into the groundwater, and that was shown to be quite effective. That will, so in March or April, if weather holds and we don't have equipment failure, that's when calcium polysulfide will be injected into the groundwater, and that will raise the pH and create geochemical conditions that will either stimulate a certain type of reducing bacteria, which will reduce the contaminants, or by immobilizing metals by adsorption or precipitation. So essentially, there's 3 things that the groundwater treatment is doing. It's adjusting the pH. It can create a bacterial environment that will help reduce the contaminants, and it can immobilize and precipitate to those metals. A pilot, as mentioned, the pilot study was conducted in 2018 and was proven to be very effective, so we're confident that will address. That being said, we have a groundwater sampling event that will take place before the injections, during the injections, and after the injections to monitor how effective it is. So next slide. So I just wanted you to see, this was the, I should specify, this is the former site layout. So you can see in the upper red square, that was the former processing building. And the red south of that is the what we're calling source area 1. And that's where the salt cake, 75,000 cubic yards of salt cake was capped. Okay, next slide. And this is the proposed area for consolidating from that former waste pile at the processing building and moving it to this area and installing that engineered cap. Okay. And as mentioned, the groundwater injections, the groundwater flow is inferred from northeast to the southwest. And so the groundwater injections are going to be in the northeast of the site. So I know there's probably a lot of questions about future development. The owner on record for 2 of the 3 parcels, Daniel Johnson, is deceased, and there are numerous complexities with the chain of title for the Johnson properties. One including a lien on 2 of 3 parcels. The other parcel was recently purchased in November of 2020, but the property remains undeveloped. So those 2 parcels that have a lien on them, it's proposed that those will go up for tax auction in May. And there's interest. People have reached out and demonstrated interest in purchasing those properties. There is no set plan. Obviously, they are not the owners of the site, but a transit hub was proposed at one point, and more recently, a rail car reuse and fixing rail cars was the latest proposal. But again, there's no owner, so I can't say for certain what that property will be. But we promote reuse and redevelopment. This site has been fenced for years. It's been contaminated for years. So we don't want this to just remain fenced and unused. There are a lot of opportunities here for the Vestal community. Not to go too much into the weeds, but there is something called the bona fide prospective purchaser provision in CERCLA, which is someone that can knowingly purchase contaminated land. They will be required to meet numerous provisions, including doing their due diligence, a lot of times called a phase 1, and abiding by those institutional controls that I mentioned earlier. They won't be allowed to penetrate the cap without speaking with us first, and if it were, they would have to be sealed. They can't install groundwaters in the area or on site, but the site cleanup will be compatible with potential future recreational, commercial, and industrial use. And next slide. And that is essentially the history and what we're planning to do out there. And I know there's probably a lot of questions, and that's why we're here. So we'd love to hear from you, ideas, questions, comments. And is that Todd? Hey, hey, Todd.
Every time someone builds on that property, and they're setting the foundation for whatever the building is, or if they want to put a 3-story house and they want a basement and they want it below the ground, they're gonna breach this protective layer that y'all are putting down.
So that would not be allowed. Any sort of housing feature with a basement, the weight would be considered, and so that's why I mentioned penetrating that cap. If they were to do that, oh wow, there you are. If they were to penetrate, they would need to work with us in order to do anything with that cap. But they would not be allowed to cut the cap, build a home, or have a basement or anything like that.
You mentioned there were contaminants detectable. And detectable is a pretty significant range. What are we talking about in terms of, is it trivial, is it just?
No, there would.
Detectable, or is it significant? There was some comment earlier about there was no posting regarding edibility of fish. Is that a concern? Or is the public being communicated properly with what's going on?
No, that's a good question. So I listed a lot of contaminants, and several of those contaminants are above regulatory standards, such as aluminum and cadmium that have been detected. And so the idea of this cap, the installation of the cap, what's happened in the past is rainwater has gotten through that landfill and will come out of the leachate, and it'll flow into that unnamed tributary into Flanagan Branch. So the cap with the engineered cap will reduce or restrict that rainwater and prevent leachate from flowing into the tributaries.
The public being communicated with it as to the hazard?
Well, hey, that's one of the reasons we're here today. So there has been contamination found in Flanagan Branch, and if there aren't signs for eating fish at I.C. King Park, there probably should be for lead and PCBs, but it's my understanding that many areas of the Tennessee River already have that restriction.
What's the design lifetime of the cap that would be installed?
I'm sorry.
How long should the cap last if you install it?
This is an engineered cap. This should be good for a lifetime. This is that's not a good answer, because it is an engineered cap, and one of the things that I maybe neglected to mention was the monitoring and maintenance of the cap is really important, and that includes this sounds silly, but mowing of the grassy fields, because if you have trees that start growing in the area, that penetrates the cap. The roots penetrate the cap. So it's important to monitor and maintain that cap. And as far as the longevity of the cap, I don't have a specific year, but just the clay and the topsoil, the natural component of it has been really effective at the site. So we're doing that, and then the liners below that this time.
No remediation of stuff under the cap. It's just going to always be there. So whenever the cap gets breached or damaged, you have leakage.
If the cap gets damaged, it needs to be repaired. And while the contamination will remain under the cap, the groundwater injections should address the metals in the groundwater. Oh yes, this is Rusty. He was actually boots on the ground in 2010 and was here for the emergency removal action.
Yes, some of you may know me, probably most of you don't, but I've essentially lived here for 2 years working on the work that we did. And since we couldn't take all of the waste off site, that's why we had to cap it in place. And every site that is on the national priorities list, or even if it's deleted from the national priorities list, if there's still waste left on site, EPA is required to do at least a review every 5 years of the protectiveness of the remedy. So it's not like we're done, like we're walking away from this. So every 5 years, we will come out and do a formal 5-year review report where we will canvass the community, find out what's going on, see if there's been any problems in that intervening 5 years. That doesn't mean we won't do any more monitoring. There'll be an operations and monitoring and maintenance plan because waste is left in place. So EPA doesn't walk away from these sites where there's waste left in place. I just want to assure you that we constantly monitor the protectiveness of our remedies for human health and the environment when we have to leave waste in place. We prefer not to leave waste in place. And this waste is not necessarily even what we would consider a hazardous waste, but because of the disposal costs, if we hauled it off site and nobody wanted it in their backyard, that's why we had to leave it in place.
Yeah.
Why don't we take one more from the audience, and then we'll take some questions from those that are participating online.
And just to piggyback on Rusty's answer, we have an Athens lab, an EPA lab that I've already reached out to collect samples in the leachate and the groundwater to just ensure that those groundwater injections are effective and that the contamination is not going off-site.
I have several related things, so if I get going too long, I'll stop me.
Yeah. Do you because this is recorded, if you want to ask the question in the microphone, you're more than welcome.
Thank you.
That would be helpful for those at home.
Okay, so the first question is, because of the history of this, this site has been in Witherspoon's hands and has been affiliated with some members of the Witherspoon family. Have you all checked for the same contaminants that were found on the other Witherspoon sites, including radiological contaminants? Have those things all been surveyed?
Yeah, great question. And Rusty was actually on our first.
Yes, we did.
Yes.
So on site, they were required to wear monitoring devices to make sure that they were not exposed to radiation. And we did not find any radiation exposure amongst those workers who were working in that waste. So there was no waste that we found from the Department of Energy site that ended up, but that was separate. Witherspoon landfill was separate.
Okay, so you mentioned that you found PCBs, beryllium, and some other things. PCBs at least would be unusual in an aluminum facility, would they not?
Those came from the transformers. Transformer oil had PCBs in it, and there were transformers on site.
Okay.
And when people came and scavenged on the site after it was abandoned, they spilled all the PCB
That was
oil on the ground.
the same source of PCBs that was found on the other Witherspoon sites too, so.
Yes, well, PCBs are ubiquitous in the environment. You'll find them everywhere because they don't biodegrade.
Okay.
Sorry. To address the PCBs in groundwater, it's unusual to find PCBs in groundwater, and it was detected, and that's usually indicative of a source. And during the removal action, those transformers were taken off site, and the PCBs. We'll be doing another groundwater sampling event, and if PCBs are detected, then they'll need to be addressed.
Okay, thanks. I've got just a couple more questions. if I've got time.
Yeah.
So you've talked about capping this. And I've been trying to educate myself on this, reading EPA documents, and I hear a lot also about liners. Could you explain the difference between a cap and a liner, and is there a liner on this project?
Yes, great question. So a cap can be comprised of several things, and usually capping needs to have a clay component to it, and at this property it's going to have 18 inches of clay and 6 inches of topsoil, and below that are going to be those geosynthetic liners that I spoke about earlier.
They're just on the top, they're not around the whole material.
Correct, yes, these are just being placed on top of that waste pile. Did that answer? I hope.
Yeah.
Mr. Knowlton, if I could ask, so for each of you that have if anybody has multiple questions, to keep it fair to everybody, if you could do one question and then we'll take another question from somebody else, and we just want to keep it fair. But we want to answer your questions. Just a heads up. So the sound equipment, the people are coming to pick it up at 7:45. So we have quite a bit of time. We're here to answer your questions.
I'll try to be brief.
So last question, then we'll open it up.
Okay, so that means that the leachate could conceivably escape through the bottom. Is there a way of leachate, of collecting the leachate? Is there a leachate collection system as part of the plan for this site?
So the cap should act as a waterproof barrier on top of the landfill.
Groundwater migrants.
Right. And so this should reduce or restrict that flow of groundwater that had been getting through the landfill, creating that leachate. But as you pointed out, groundwater does flow, but during the emergency removal action, there were 2 drainage ditch that were installed to the east and to the west of that landfill to restrict that flow of water. But we will not be installing a leachate collection system as part of this. That being said, the leachate will be sampled after the groundwater injections take place.
Peter?
Yeah.
I can elaborate. I mean, so I'm a geologist like Peter, and so what we had was leachate within the waste, and that leachate was getting into the waste because of the stormwater. And essentially, the waste was in a stream valley. It was a intermittent stream valley. But when we put the cap on there, we put wells to monitor that leachate. And those wells have dried up. The leachate's not there anymore. It's not being generated because of the capping and the diverting. So that addresses the issue of future leachate coming up from the bottom.
Okay, one final comment, because this, so I've got this EPA,
Study here, secondary aluminum processing waste, salt cake characterization and reactivity, 2015. And I quote from that, the salt cake should always be managed at facilities that use synthetic liner systems with leachate collection. So this is an EPA document. Are you in conformity with the document or not?
That's a tough question to answer. It's not as black and white as that. When a landfill is installed, that there is a leachate collection system. This was an unlicensed landfill, and we are coming here to install a cap and prevent that leachate, and we're going to be monitoring the leachate. So that's the best answer I can give you on that. Unless you have something to add.
Well, we're also doing the groundwater treatment. There's many unlined landfills that are out there, older landfills. Some were unpermitted, some were permitted. And we will constantly be monitoring this one, like I said, in perpetuity, at least once every 5 years, as long as there's waste left in place. If we get a bunch of money, we can dig up the waste, we'd like to do that. That's what we looked into, but it was cost prohibitive. So this was the best we could do with the money that we had. It's not perfect. I mean, no remedy is going to be absolutely perfect. That's why we're doing operations, maintenance, and monitoring, and we will make sure that this remedy remains protective of human health and the environment. And yes, current subtitle C, Rick, I'm using terms, current landfills require construction of a bottom liner. But older permitted landfills that didn't have a bottom liner, they're not putting bottom liners on them. They're just doing the monitoring, or capping them and monitoring them. So even ones that were, legal, permitted landfills, they don't put bottom liners on them afterwards. It's just not cost feasible. It's not, it can't be done.
Okay, do you want to take some questions from?
Yeah, let's take about 3 questions from those online. If you are participating through Zoom or online, please put your questions in the chat. We can't hear them, so Laura is going to read them.
You'll just repeat this. Is the landfill itself lined, or are there plans for it to be?
Is the landfill lined, or are there plans to be?
Yeah, I think that was just answered.
Is there an opportunity for citizen science here? This is 2-part. Can EPA provide analysis of surface water, sediment, et cetera, of samples collected by community members?
I'm sorry, could you say that?
First part is opportunity for citizen science here.
Is there an opportunity for citizen science here? Sorry, I'm having to repeat it for those at home. Okay.
And then, can EPA provide analysis of surface water, sediment, et cetera, of the samples collected by community members?
Can community members see the analytical?
Submit samples.
Submit samples.
From the community. Would you take those into consideration?
Well, they would have to access the site, so.
Well, we have had participation under our program, another acronym called CUP, College and Underserved Community Partnership Program. Maryville College went out there, and they were looking more into reuse and redevelopment, but we are constantly looking for ways to work with local colleges. University of Tennessee, they were involved a little bit when I was out there. They were doing some remote sensing, trying to see what was in the landfill. And so, yes, we welcome any help we can get, and we will provide that information to the public. It's public information, public record.
I think the question was, would you test materials that people sent you? If citizen scientists collected material and wanted it tested, could EPA provide that service as part of this process?
Well, if people are worried about their well water, that would be more of a Department of Health issue. They monitor wells, and as far as I know, no drinking water wells have been impacted by the groundwater contamination at this site. We also worked in conjunction with the state fisheries department, and we sampled fish tissue at Icy King Park where people go fishing. And, since it's fish swim and it's right there on the Tennessee River, there were PCBs in the fish, but we can't directly relate those to the site.
What about the level of the fish?
The level of PCBs in the fish? I can't remember right off. I'm sorry, sir?
That's fine.
Yeah, okay.
All right, a couple more virtual, and then we'll take some more from the audience.
The next question is, please identify on the map the current monitoring stations.
Okay, please identify on the map the current monitoring stations. Okay, I can point those out if we.
It wouldn't be on any of those.
Actually.
Bring it up here to the camera.
I got it right here.
You got it.
I'm just waiting for.
You want this up by the camera?
No, that one doesn't have the groundwater monitoring wells, but there is a.
Your maps up here. Which one would you like to do? Would you like to do the capped or the site layout?
Site layout. That should have them. And can the folks at home see that screen? I can walk over there.
Yeah. If you
Yeah. That way they can see.
It's not great.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna go off mic. Okay. So we've got a set of monitoring wells right here. Set of monitoring wells here, and they're a pair of monitoring wells, one installed shallow and one installed deeper. One right here, another set here. I don't want to miss any. This is actually kind of hard to see. We've got one in the northeast portion, a set right here, and I believe just a shallow here, and a shallow here. So this, I'll come back over to the microphone. So those points were selected specifically to essentially encapsulate that mass of landfill and waste on the property. Okay. Any other?
So we'll take one more virtual and then come to the audience.
All right.
How close is the bottom of the landfill to the water table?
How close is the water?
Bottom of the landfill to the water table.
The water table, I think, is it 25, 22 feet? It's about 25 feet. I guess that would be 25 feet down.
How deep's the waste?
The waste of the southern landfill. So actually, the former processing building, gosh, I wish I had a picture on the slide, is up gradient, or is at a higher level. Here it's essentially even, and it's probably about, oh gosh, it filled in the stream valley, so 15 feet, 20 feet. So it's near the water table. I'm sorry.
You're saying it's within 10 feet of the water table?
It probably would be, yeah.
Questions from the audience?
Ralph.
Can I ask a hypothetical then based on that? So about 5 years ago, I lived pretty high ground in Colonial Village. About 5 years ago, it rained 9 days in a row, just a little bit of rain, and then we got 5 inches in one day, and water came up through my basement floor for like 3 or 4 days in a row, flooded my neighbor's basement. What would we expect to happen out of a site like that with that kind of rain event? Would we expect to see that groundwater coming back up to penetrate the?
Yeah, so this should be, long story short, no. The concentrations that we have found have been on site. And since the cap has been installed, that leachate has been minimal or non-existent. So a rainwater event like that cap that is currently on the waste piles should shed off of that landfill material.
And the groundwater from those tributaries could be diverted, or would it be rising up?
During a heavy rain event, I mean, the groundwater table can rise, but that contamination has been detected on site. And so those further down wells, those are at lower or non-detect concentrations. So if you had a house on the property, I would have a worse answer for you. But because you're not on site, I would not expect for that contamination to be off site. That was about the same. Yeah, well, you've been raising your hand a while. Yeah.
I want to thank you for being here, and I own property on both sides of the railroad track that adjoin this property. I've been there for a long time, and I know a lot of us in South Knoxville have been dealing with the Witherspoon sites for a long time, and we never thought anybody was going to come and do something. So that's really appreciated. With that being said, what I'm hearing, what you're saying you're going to do is basically make this a little bit better landfill. And I know you want to do more than that. And the concerns I have is that I haven't heard that mechanism where you're going to have these controls that you have in place, meaning if somebody comes to build on this site, we don't have an office of EPA that somebody comes and gives a building permit. How is somebody from the city of Knoxville or Knox County going to put these restrictions that you're talking about in place? And then the other part of that is, why don't you have a lien on the property as EPA, as taxpayers? All this millions of dollars we're putting into this, shouldn't we have a say in what happens with this property?
Yeah,
So maybe repeat what
right, okay, yeah, I'm gonna try to repeat that as best as I can. So why, who is going to, and correct me if I'm wrong, I want to paraphrase, who is going to ensure that those institutional controls are going to be abided by for future reuse? Did I?
Yes, yes.
Okay, okay. It, this,
Yeah, so how's that gonna work? I don't wanna say I wear two hats, I also do plans review for Knox County.
yeah,
So those are in Knox County, I'll probably be one of the people that would get those plans when they come in.
yeah,
But I'm intimately aware, someone else might not be.
right, right.
And so,
And yes, we want to be engaged with the community as much as possible. I'm saying that for the you noted community engagement, and there are those institutional controls. The potential purchaser or the purchaser of those properties, they would have to abide by that. And as Rusty mentioned before, there's what's called a 5-year review. So every 5 years, there's a review of that site to ensure that those institutional controls are being.
how is the purchaser gonna even know that condition applies?
Oh, there's going to be direct communication with us as part of the sale. Like I said, that.
So with the tax sale, at that moment is when EPA would be involved for the purchase.
Correct. Yep. And so that we would be in communication with them. And like I said, we've done a reuse assessment at the property, and we encourage reuse of the property. But we want to hear what you all want to do with the property. I'm not saying I can't promise that we're going to install or do what the community exactly wants, but we're going to work directly with you during that process. Yeah.
Actually, I said I wasn't gonna do this.
Oh, yeah.
I'm gonna tell.
This is also a former project manager for this site.
So, great question on the reuse and redevelopment. So this site, even though EPA is cleaning it up, and we are going to require restrictive covenants to be placed in the records that run with that land into perpetuity, which we will also enforce along with our
That'll be
friends.
on the deed?
Yes, sir. And along with our friends at TDEC, who are here this evening. I know that they were introduced earlier. Okay. And so EPA's process of cleaning up does not replace the local land use decision-making that takes place here. Okay? So in other words, it has to be zoned for whatever it is that's proposed to be constructed there. It has to go through all the local processes. EPA's processes do not supplant that. We supplement that and we clean it up to a certain state based on what we expect use will be in the future, but it still goes through the local land use planning process, just like every other property, including your property, as you know, if you've done some work with the local agencies here. So our process does not supplant that.
But there's a maintenance part of this where you say you have to mow this. If it's in tax arrears right now, who's maintaining that? And this could go on, I know you're saying tax sale, but nobody may not want to buy this, right?
You're right.
And who's gonna mow it, I guess, is the cap.
You're looking at them.
So we could have you here for 10 years.
You could have us here.
We've got lots of nice houses here.
Yes, you do. And I swore I wasn't going to say anything. I'm sorry.
No,
Peter.
hey,
I'm
it's
done. Thank you.
I appreciate. We've got two folks that have been heavily involved with the project here, and Scott's actually our reuse and redevelopment coordinator. So it's also good to have him here. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
And thanks for all the detail on this. I echo the appreciation. But the question about citizen science and collecting samples has not really been answered. And I'm aware, because I've done some citizen science. I'm not a scientist, but I've been trained in the chain of custody, and I'm aware that there are requirements about that to make the sample valuable. You can't just take a mason jar,
Yeah.
scoop out the water in your basement after a rain, say, test it. But if those requirements are met, what's the answer to the question about will you test our samples? It seems to me
Say
that's a
athletic and
legitimate
brave.
question.
Yeah, that's, I'm glad you brought that back up. To be honest, I don't know exactly how that would work, but we have done things called split samples. So, well, we would go out and collect a sample, and another company or individual would collect a sample. I can't promise you that we can do that, but that on the last slide here is my contact information, my email, my phone number. I want everybody to, I may not be answering, the questions that everybody has. So feel free to email, call me, but we could potentially do a split sample and send that to, usually those are two separate labs to ensure that sample quality is valid. But we have an in-house lab, and so we could talk about, potentially doing that, because we will be going out there, and I could see, bringing somebody out there.
Maybe somebody from the group.
Lisa.
I guess my question goes back to this question of reuse, and what's been done about the fact that the people who owned it before and who caused multiple millions of dollars worth of damage in this community are not going to be able to turn around and buy this property again and reuse it once it's been cleaned up for $3,500.
Will you promise not to sell it to the Witherspoon family?
We will have involvement in that.
Against the law? Well, they've got more people who made money off of this. I mean, all the money didn't disappear. Yeah.
Hey, Scott, can you?
Yeah, I think, Scott is reiterating what I mentioned, that Daniel Johnson, the owner of 2 of the 3 parcels, passed away, and there's now a tax lien. He essentially was going to leave that to his children, and his children turned it down. Went through the courts, didn't want to have anything to do with it.
Well, is there, so if we take a step back and we talk about all of these properties, that some of which are still owned by Witherspoon, if you create if you have a sexual crime, you go on a register and you don't get to do certain things again because of your history. Is that true in this area too? Can David Witherspoon or his family just buy another piece of property and start again?
Yeah, legally, yes, they could. Yeah.
They retain ownership of these sites.
So Smoky Mountain Smelters, no. So they don't own, or that was Daniel Johnson that owned 2 of the 3 parcels of the site.
Let's take one
So-
more from the audience, and we'll take some more from the computer.
Yes, you. Sorry, I'm trying.
To the question of reuse.
Yes.
Because of all of the bad actors within the here in Vestal that have done so much damage. I have a question about what's going to happen to this property. Personally, I think it should be left green space. Otherwise, it's going to be a problem forever, and who knows, natural disasters. We just don't know. So my question is for the audience. I want just people to raise their hand if they would like for this to remain a green space rather than an area that will be developed by apartments or industry.
So for those at home, yes, we're raising the hands in the audience, showing, and let's keep them raised so everybody that Vestal community or those here most, if not all, are raising their hand to keep this a green space. I'm sorry, say.
The irony of it, you can't plant trees.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's a, it's a.
Yeah. But it could be a green space, I think it could.
I mean,
Right, yes. Yeah. Hey, well, the good news is, and I was just out there today with several individuals. This is a 13-acre site, and while there's specific areas that we've seen on the map that can't be, the trees can't grow, there's still acreage around that where trees can grow. Yeah.
Just say one more thing, and when I say green space, I don't mean it be left like it is. I mean, this could be a park that would be low impact, that wouldn't have activities that would disturb the site.
Right, right. And for those at home, she's recognizing that, green space can be a lot of things, including a park, trails, soccer fields, recreational.
how does the county leaders feel about that? If they're gonna put it on the tax bill, they obviously have a different idea than that.
They wanna get the tax revenue probably, right?
We have a meeting with the county.
Yeah, we're
on
actually meeting with
Thursday.
the county commissioner on Thursday to.
First daily?
Yes.
They put it on
The reason they're not here tonight is because they had their work session, tonight.
Yes, yeah. If I could say a few things, so it is 7:30 or a little later, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I encourage you to write down or take a picture of both Peter and my contact information. Our phone numbers are there, our emails are there. We are here for you, and we openly want you to reach out to us if you have questions. For those of you that need to leave, thank you so much for coming. For those of you that can hang around until 7:45 when the sound system leaves, keep questions coming. So we'll take a couple more from, no more?
Okay.
Okay, so you guys have us.
Yeah, we're here. Okay, I've gotten you already, Ralph.
Can someone explain the safety features that are being implemented during this phase where one pile of contaminants is being relocated to another pile of contaminants?
Yeah, that good question. So the contractors and an EPA remedial project manager, either myself or my colleagues, will be out there to ensure that the contractors are following those measures, and some of those measures include dust suppression, integrity of the ground, and ensuring that they're not eroding around the areas to promote runoff. So somebody will be doing remedial oversight during this whole process.
Can you explain that dust?
Oh, the dust suppression? Yeah. So.
You wet it.
Yeah, that's essentially it's a pretty straightforward. We do not use PCV oil to get the dust suppression.
But if you're wetting it, like where's that water going?
I think that would be a very light spray. I don't have the engineered documents, but it's not a rainwater event.
Before we take another question, I do want to acknowledge, Councilwoman Amelia Parker. She's with the city of Knoxville. So thank you for being here.
On occasion, is here to pick up the podium.
Okay, so they're here to pick up the podium. Can we have it, or did they say 7:45?
They told me.
They told us 7:45, so we're gonna hang out. And if they take the mic, I can stand without the mic. All right, Ralph.
I have a quick follow-up. John started on beryllium.
Yes.
Is that part of the aluminum processing thing? I mean,
Yes, that's a byproduct of aluminum smelting. Yeah.
And I had a second question really for Marjorie, and that is that in 2015, when that was being finished, the records, the official records, I guess the administrative record disappeared from the library.
Is that the what?
We have a real nice library in South Knoxville.
So I'm going to be full disclosure here. I took the records when when fact sheets were done back in 2015. I took that information to build the community involvement plan, and the one on Bearden Branch was the one that was listed. I actually was doing research last night and saw that there is a South Knoxville library, and so I would love to be in contact with them and see if we can work out for them to also be an information repository for us.
There are a lot of those records being now, or they still find paper.
Good question. So because of the Paper Reduction Act, everything now is online. So that website, can y'all see the website address? All our documents now are online. So if you go to that website, all the site documents will be there. And again, I will reach out to the South Knoxville Library to see if we can establish a partnership with them. Thank you for bringing that up.
Does that have design details also of the cap and line and everything?
The website,
the website, has that been posted? The remedial design, yes, the record of decision that includes all of those.
Shows the drawings and cross sections and stuff like that.
I don't know if the ROD does, but
Are those available?
they should, yeah. And if you can't find it, reach out to me, and I'll be sure you get those. Okay, I'm sorry, Todd, I've gotten you already. We got a new. I'll get you next.
There's a couple of things. The capping, I think, is pretty liberal with that term. The put the blanket, capping involves sides, bottoms, and putting a cap on the tank, right? So you put the stars on here. You have no French drainage systems or anything connected to anything. There's been concerns brought up about swelling groundwaters, being at the bottom of the site is so close to the water line already, a little swell. Boom, you get your leachate, it comes back out. So you just wash it over years and many years. So I think the cap is a little pushing. But what I want to talk about is this polychlorosulfide. I'm going to inject into the groundwater. That hasn't been covered at all. So part of the idea to clean up is injecting more chemicals into the groundwater to produce a basic environment and hoping that some bacteria will just get to work without any motivation, right? Or maybe precipitate the metal out. So can we?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So the calcium polysulfide, the good news is that this has already been tested back in 28 at different sort of concentrations. So it's.
And the contaminants that we're dealing with here compared with the test study, what are the differences? There's a lot of factors here that.
Yeah. For sure. Yeah, that addressed metals specifically. What we're targeting here, and the good news is it was shown to be effective at precipitating. I can check the website to see if those are done. Yeah. And again, please reach out to me directly to have more conversation.
Is there public education on the health implications of the current site and on the continuation of the cleanup?
Okay,
Can you repeat that
sorry.
again?
Are there public education about health implications of the site as it is currently and as it's going to be cleaned up?
Public health. That's a really good question. So I reached out to the Tennessee Department of Public Health, and they do what's called a public health assessment. And I think it was 2010, they put out a fact sheet. So I found the fact sheet online. I wasn't able to find the actual public health assessment. So I called them and heard back. And in their words, not mine, we didn't do a public health assessment because the emergency response remediated the issue. So
So will you put into effect a public health assessment, or will there be public education on the health implications of living so close to the area?
So that would fall under the Tennessee Department of Public Health. So we do have, and again, the idea, or not the idea, what we're doing here is capping this landfill, and so it is eliminating and that off-site exposure. So this is, just to clarify, this is mostly a soil contamination site. And there's no nearby drinking water wells, which is something that is always of concern. So I hope that answers. So that was who I reached out to, and that was their response of, yeah, a public health assessment wasn't completed because of the emergency remedial action. Sarah.
So I live about 0.3 miles away from the site, and I'm wondering how we would determine the size of the plume that would prohibit any sort of well water, anything like that.
Good question. So those institutional controls are for on-site, and to my knowledge, there are no nearby drinking water wells. This is all city water within a nearby distance.
Can that be communicated to the health department who looks at wells? Because some people do wells for other reasons.
Right.
Is there a recommended restriction zone for wells around the site that maybe could be communicated to, so somebody does?
The communicated to the public health department?
Yes.
You might be able to better answer that one.
So if you have health concerns, if you want me to serve as the intermediary, so to speak, I can reach out to ATSDR. We can start a list of health concerns, to get communication between that agency and us and y'all. Everybody, it is 7:45. I want to thank you for giving of your time. Thank you for being open and receptive to what we had to say. Thank you for your participation. Again, please feel free to reach out to us if you have questions. Peter and I are both willing to stay another 15 minutes until 8 o'clock if you want to have a more informal one-on-one, but the sound system is fixing to leave us. I do want to say too, if you have not signed in, please do so. I know I'm a broken record on that, but we truly want to have an active, accurate mailing list so that you can stay informed of the cleanup activities. So thank you all for being out, and Peter and I will stay for another 15 minutes. Thank you all. Have a great evening. Thank you so much.
Get your question.
Thanks, Paul. Okay. Can it wait until after? We got a lot of that there. But yeah, I'm happy to. Hey, you made it.